Hello and welcome to the latest installment of PSG Talking. I'm your host Ed, and on today's show we're talking all about PSG's Champions League clash against Manchester City, and we're going to be doing that with a very special guest. But before we get started, let me thank all of you out there who have subscribed to PSG Talk Extra Time here on Substack. We really appreciate your support and hope you enjoy the content we've been putting out, and you can always suggest topics for us to discuss by using the chat feature. If you haven't subscribed, I hope you'll consider doing so. It's $5 per month or $50 for the entire year. You get access to more podcasts and articles from myself and top journalists who cover PSG. Right now, we have a great piece from Robin Berner on how Kvicha Kvaratskhelia could define a PSG era. And we have a video you can watch featuring myself and other PSG supporters talking about the Lens match, previewing City. We talk transfers, and we get into the Neymar interview recently. After the City match, we'll have a conversation with Jonathan Johnson, who will be at that match and who will give us a first-hand account of what goes down. All right, let's get to this show, which features a pre-recorded conversation I had with David Mooney of the Blue Moon podcast. David, who's a Manchester City fan, and I had a great chat about City's form, their best player, the perception of PSG amongst Premier League supporters, and we get his score prediction. I had the pleasure of joining his show as well, so if you want to listen to that episode, just search Blue Moon Podcast wherever you get your podcasts and you'll find that episode. All right, without further ado, here's my conversation with David from the Blue Moon Podcast. David, welcome in. We just wrapped up an interview for your show, the Blue Moon Podcast, about the big PSG and Manchester City matchup, and now the tables have turned, so I've got some questions for you and really look forward to your insights. Let's get right into it. You know, David, there's a real possibility that the loser of this match could very well not qualify for the knockout round of the Champions League. So, how are Manchester City viewing this match? How are the fans viewing this match? Is it the biggest game of the season?
Honestly, probably not for the time being, because the season has been going it's been getting better in the last few weeks, but it's been kind of slowly meandering towards this point. And I think a lot of people there is an acceptance that City are not going to be challenging for the Champions League this season. If they come up against PSG. If they come up against a team that is in any way, organised with firepower, then there is going to be trouble. That isn't to say City can't win the game. Sure, they can. They could. They can quite easily win these sorts of games. But the problems that have been on show this season, at the moment, I think fans just want performances back. Performances come back, and results should follow. At the minute, the performances have not been great. They were pretty good against Brentford this week, and even then, there were still kind of weaknesses that were exploited. So it's baby steps. It's getting up the next rung on the ladder. And I think when it comes to going to PSG in the Parc des Princes, City might win, but I think there is an acceptance that if they qualify for the knockout phase of the Champions League, they'll probably come up against someone that could quite easily knock them out. There was the pandemic year, the 1920 season. City were knocked out of the Champions League to Lyon. They had these same sort of problems that season. They would that season. I mean, I'd bite your hand off for that sort of season now, where they would play well in two games and then badly in one, instead of badly in all three. But they beat Real Madrid. They knocked Real Madrid out over two legs and were brilliant in the two legs. And then they came up against Lyon in that round robin tournament in Portugal, and they were awful for 90 minutes. And Lyon quite deservedly knocked them out. So that's the sort of thing we're dealing with here. I don't think City have the consistency to go on and win the Champions League. I might be wrong, but I mean it feels unlikely. So, biggest game of the season, probably not. I think when it comes to the biggest game of the season at the moment, it's always the next one, because they've just got to build on what they did in the last one. We'll see how it goes in France, but let's say I am less than confident right now.
So you've mentioned this sort of uncharacteristic season for Manchester City. They're struggling in the Champions League, as PSG are. They're sixth in the Premier League table, I think, last time I looked. So what do you attribute this poor form to? A lot of people will say, it's simply the absence of Rodri, but is it something more systematic? What would you say is the biggest issue at City right now?
Oh, how long have you got? We can run through a whole host of things right now. So yes, Rodri is a big problem, but the other problems still exist with him there. He obviously solves a lot of the issues, but he's papering over cracks basically. We'll start with the profile of the squad. So Guardiola has quite publicly said in the last couple of weeks, he was talking in the summer, he didn't want any transfers to come in, or he didn't want to make major changes to the squad. Director of football Chiki Begiristain was saying that he, over the summer, he was looking at making maybe a few more moves than City did. And Guardiola was like, no, these guys, I trust them. I think there's more to get out of these guys. And he's been wrong. There isn't more to get out of these guys. You look at some of the players in that squad, and Bernardo Silva's dropped a little bit this season. His level's down a bit. Kevin De Bruyne has really struggled since coming back from his injury. He feels like he's lost maybe a yard and a half of pace. He's still got the passing range. He's still got the through balls and the crosses and those sorts of things. But it just feels like he can't, like the ball isn't quite bouncing for him anymore because he doesn't seem to have the physicality that he used to have. Phil Foden's had a difficult start to the season with injury and illness and everything that came with that. So he's only just getting into the team. And then the form of the wingers has been, I mean, frankly, atrocious. Savinho's looked good in the last couple of games, but up until then, he's been all dribbling and no end product, and no assists, no goals. And then that's started to slowly change. Doku's been in and out of the team, injured and not injured. And when he's in the team, he's not very consistent. Jack Grealish is, I mean, where is he? He's not the Jack Grealish that we knew from 2023. He was such an important part of that team and that won the treble and won the Champions League in 2023. And I mean, he just isn't that. He's not been that for 2 years now. So like, what's going on there? And you've got a system that is designed to play up to Erling Haaland, and they're just not getting the ball to him. So he's not scoring either because he's not involved in the game. So the squad profile has been kind of overlooked, and the type of player that they have in there. There's always a balance at City between we call them pauser players and ball carrying players. So there's players who know when to go, and there's players who know when to keep the ball and recycle it and move it on. And there's been a lot of go players, but not a lot of pauser players, and that's kind of affected the balance. They brought back İlkay Gundogan, who was a fantastic player when he left. He had a year at Barcelona, and he is not the same player that has come back. He's looking leggy, he's looking slower, and when they play a central midfield of Mateo Kovacic and İlkay Gundogan, or Bernardo Silva and İlkay Gundogan, or Bernardo Silva and Mateo Kovacic, when the ball gets the wrong side of them, they can't get back. So as soon as teams are past that first level of City's press, then they're in and they're going to create something. On top of that, they're playing towards a back line that has it's been ravaged by injury and isn't performing to the same level as it has been previously. So I think Ake and Akanji, who are currently the two starting centre backs, I think they're both carrying injuries right now. They don't seem to be able to move as freely and easily as they normally do. John Stones has been out of the team more than he's been in it this season because of injury. And Ruben Dias, who's normally quite regularly fit, I mean, he's been out for a month so far as well. So there's consistent injury problems. They have a small squad. It's a squad that's filled with quality, but they have a small squad numbers-wise. And the number of injuries they've had has meant that everybody's had to play again and again and again and again. So they're all knackered as well. They're all really tired. So fatigue, injuries, the wrong profile of players, and once they went on that run where they lost and lost and lost and lost, the confidence just disappeared as well. So all of that snowballed completely out of control just before Christmas, and it only feels in the last couple of weeks like the tide is starting to turn. But I mean, you look at City's fixtures, and I sit there and think, I don't know when they're going to win again. They go away to Ipswich this weekend. Ipswich not great this season, but they have beaten Chelsea at Portman Road, so it won't be an easy game. They then go away to PSG, but in the run they've got Tottenham, they've got Liverpool, they've got Arsenal, they've got Nottingham Forest, like Brighton. These are all teams that I look at and think, I don't know if you're going to beat them. And so we could genuinely be looking at March until City next win a game, and that like for the profile of squad they've got, that's just madness. So this season is completely snowballed, and I think like it just kind of. some element of control just needs to come back. And I actually thought we saw a bit of that against Brentford, and then they went and let in a 92nd minute equaliser. So we'll wait and see how this next week goes. But again, it all leads me to not being very confident for the next few weeks.
It's interesting. And just hearing you talk about the squad, it almost seems like if you put PSG and Manchester City together, you'd have a pretty good team. You've got a striker who can't get the ball, and we've got guys who can create chances, but no one actually scores. Yeah. So we need that. And then, of course, you mentioned De Bruyne, and I hear in the United States, there's been some rumors of maybe him coming to Major League Soccer, which is never good for one of your top players if you're in the Premier League, if they're coming to Major League Soccer. So I appreciate all that insight into the squad.
I think De Bruyne, actually, I don't expect him to have a season after this one at City. I think this will be his last season. I don't think he certainly looks as if the injuries have taken their toll at this point, and I don't know how that changes. So it could well be in the MLS next season.
Yeah. Most informed player, is it Erling Haaland? Just can't get service?
No, it's not actually. Haaland, he's scored a couple recently, but he's actually been underperforming for the chances that he's had. He was overperforming at the start of the season, so it's kind of balanced out a little bit. Phil Foden's the one in form right now. He had a really difficult start to the season. He couldn't really get into the team with injury and illness, and he couldn't put any run of games together. But really quite quietly now, he started, I think, 3 of the last 4. He scored in certainly 2 of them, maybe 3 of them. I can't remember the games. But he's really kind of, it feels as if this is his season starting now. The problem is, it's kind of like everything. He's like the dog in that meme where it's all on fire and he's saying this is fine. So like he's perfectly fine, but everything else around him is falling apart. And that's kind of how it feels right now. So yeah, Foden's in form. He would, if he was going to cause any damage to PSG, I would put my money on it being him. It's just whether the rest of the team are also there to be able to support him or not, and keep the ball out of the net at the City end, because I fear they're not.
How different, I'm just looking at your squad against Juventus. That was a 2-0 win for Juventus. How different do you think the starting 11 will be for the PSG match compared to the Juventus match? What changes do you think?
I honestly can't remember what the team was. There's been this City team has changed week after week after week. Guardiola has made I think he's made the most changes in the Premier League this season, from one squad to the next, from one match day to the next. And that isn't like him at all. It's just been, okay, who's fit? Which 11 players are fit this week? Okay, right, out you go. If I were to name the team right now, I would suspect it'd be Ortega in goal. You would probably have Ake and Akanji as your 2 centre backs, but as I've already said, I actually think they're injured. I don't think they're fit to play at all. Right back is probably Rico Lewis, but again could be Matthias Nunes. And then left back is Josko Gvardiol, who is completely out of form right now. He needs some time out of it. I think he's brilliant, Gvardiol, but he needs some time out of the team, and there's just nobody there who can give him that. And then if I was picking for the forward, the midfield and forward line, I mean, you'd hold with Kovacic. You'd probably have De Bruyne and Bernardo in there. You'd probably have Foden and Savinho in there, and then you'd have Haaland up top. Yeah. That kind of feels the most balanced that City can get right now. But if that is the team and they're all in their current form, PSG will get chances.
Yeah. And that's quite a bit different than the Juventus match I'm just looking at. So that's really interesting. I want to get your opinion on this, just kind of switching gears away from Manchester City a little bit, focus on PSG. PSG has undergone this transformation from a team that just kind of spends blindly on superstars, and now they're actually making really smart transfers, not only just good players, but getting them at a value that makes sense instead of just throwing money at the problem. And so for you and other Premier League fans that are you starting to maybe hear that this narrative around PSG is starting to change a little bit?
Being honest, not really.
Okay.
Although, in fairness, there's not a huge narrative around PSG in England and the Premier League, to be fair. And I also don't know if it's because I'm so clouded by what the narrative around City is that I just don't see it elsewhere. Because for a long time, City, I mean, good luck trying to change people's minds, because people have their ways and they believe it, because I've seen it with City.
Absolutely.
The number of times, like, I hear all the time that City have a squad with hundreds of players, and it's like they don't. They have one of the smallest squads in the Premier League, and they have done for the last 5-6 years.
That's Chelsea they're thinking of.
Yeah, exactly. And like the idea that City go out and spend every summer, and they bring in 6 new players, like, it just isn't true. And I wish that it were true, because then they might actually have a fighting chance this season. So, like, once the narrative is set, you're kind of stuck in your ways with that. It's interesting to see that, because that sort of development with PSG, because I always feel like, certainly from an outsider's perspective, I always feel like the way City have been run and the way City have built in the last kind of 7, 8, 9 years. I mean, certainly since Guardiola arrived, people always talked about, but look at the squad that Guardiola inherited. And I was like, yeah, but actually look at the squad that he inherited. All those players that you talk about as fantastic players that he had when he arrived, he made them that. He made them fantastic. There was, he played Fabian Delph at left back. A midfielder who hadn't really impressed at City. Turned him into a left back for a season and a half, got 100 points and defended a title with him there. There's all sorts of nuance to what Guardiola has done at City, and it doesn't come down to inheriting a great squad. There were great players in that squad, but they needed it kind of bringing out of them. And certainly the narrative from looking outside at PSG was always, they've spent 100 million on this, 100 million on that, and you have Messi and you've got Kylian Mbappe in there, Neymar, these sorts of Galactico players that come in, and you kind of like, good luck managing that lot, because they can't. How can you start to tactically do things with them when they all want to individually do their thing? Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how it actually played out. But that's certainly how it felt from outside, and I always wondered, like, people, the narrative around City in England has always been, you hear Liverpool fans and Arsenal fans from the last few years, when City were winning the title, they won't win it this year, but when City were winning the title, was always, how can we possibly compete with this? And I kind of look at the players that City have brought in, and I go, well, you could have bought Manuel Akanji. He was available for you. Ruben Dias was not City's first choice centre-back. You could have gone out and got him as well. The only player that City have ever really broken their scheme to buy was Erling Haaland. And in many ways, when they got him, it kind of breaks the system that Guardiola likes to play. Haaland isn't really a Guardiola player, but he's so good that Guardiola goes, you know what, we have to work out a way to get him into this team. And that was kind of the journey of the treble winning season. So, like, how can people compete with City? How can people compete with PSG? They can, by buying smart. And City have spent a lot of money, but they spent a lot of money smartly up until the last couple of seasons. I don't think they've spent particularly well in the last couple of seasons. But up to that point, they were spending money really smartly and kind of building a team for a system. And if that's the way PSG are heading right now, then crack on and do it. Give it time. Let it work. Yes. But unfortunately for you, the narrative it probably will never change. So I wouldn't hang your hat on that happening.
Yeah, and I think Manchester City is a good blueprint for PSG. You've won the Champions League. You've had a manager in there for several years. What I see from PSG now, they're really trying to emulate what Manchester City, having Luis Enrique in, even though we struggle, there's some fans, I think, a small pocket of them will say, oh, we need a new manager, but I've been trying to drive that narrative. Let's stick with them. We got to see this out. We need someone consistent. We can't just recycle managers every 2 years. Working with the players, buying young, working with them, developing them, like you said, Guardiola, working with players and trying them out in different positions. So I really see a lot of what PSG is doing now, trying to emulate what Manchester City has been doing for the last few years.
I think the other side of it as well is, like, Luis Enrique is not an idiot. He's a good manager. He knows what he's doing. So the idea, because I grew up in the 90s, and I always used to, like, City would sack managers left, right, and centre through the 90s. And United fans would always say to me, Manchester United fans would always say to me, why don't you try sticking with a manager? And the answer is because the managers are not any good. They're not hiring good managers. That's why they're changing them. Like, Manchester United's success is not because they stuck by Sir Alex Ferguson. It's because Ferguson was a good manager. Yeah. City's success has not been because they've stuck by Pep Guardiola. It's because Guardiola is a good manager.
Yes.
And once you've got a good manager in place, it becomes really easy to stick by them because eventually the results start to come.
Yeah.
And like, go back to Guardiola's first season, like a lot of us, myself included, after that 16-17 season, we all sat there and thought, maybe England is too tough for Guardiola. Maybe he can't do it here, because City really didn't play well in that first year. And then the second year, they score 100 points and break every single record that the country's ever seen. And you're like, oh yeah, that's why that's what they were building towards. Okay, it all makes sense. So, like, I think there's a tendency in football to make a really quick and snap judgment. Yeah. And I don't think that, certainly if your transfer strategy has become, we are no longer going to go out and buy the biggest name talent and the must-have player every year. Like, listen, that's worked for Real Madrid for however long. They've gone out, bought the best and been the best. Fine, okay, it can work. But if you're moving away from that transfer strategy, then you don't suddenly fall into the strategy of, yeah, we're going to long-term plan the squad, but we're going to not do that with the managerial team. We're just going to keep chopping and changing that. Because if you want consistency from the squad, you need consistency of tactics and you need consistency of the manager. And if you've got a good manager, give it time. Yeah. Give it time to work. And there's plenty of evidence that that can kind of lead the way that you go. You just look at England. Yeah. And Brighton have done it, and they've consistently replaced, when the manager's been poached, they've consistently replaced them with somebody who is of the same profile as the previous manager. They have a desire to go in this, like to play in this way and do it in this way. Brentford, it's really worked for them with Thomas Frank and kind of building to a system that Frank is employing. And I mean, the outlier again, you talk about Real Madrid as the outlier, Chelsea are the outlier. It's kind of working this season under Maresca. For kind of 15 years or so, it's worked with them chopping and changing. But it can only work for so long. And I think we're kind of seeing that with Chelsea at the minute. If you've got a consistent squad and you've got a good manager, give him time.
Yeah, and we didn't do that with Thomas Tuchel. He got PSG far in the Champions League to a final, and then fired him the next season around Christmas time, and then he goes on to Chelsea and wins the Champions League. So PSG, I think, learned their lesson. They got their hands slapped a little bit, and I think now we're going to stick with Luis Enrique and build a real sporting project. So, all right, David, let's get you out of here with this question. I hope, give me a score prediction for this one. Who wins? What's the score? Who scores?
Oh,
what do you foresee?
So, there is no way on earth that anybody who is predicting this game will get it anywhere near right what happens. My gut instinct with the way that City are playing right now is that City are vulnerable. I think they can score, and I think they probably will score. I think they'll struggle to keep PSG out at the other end. And I can see a narrow 2-1 victory for one of these two teams. I can see a high-scoring draw. The one scoreline I don't see is 0-0. I don't see how these two teams cancel each other out like that. I think they can cancel each other out in all the bad ways, and they can end up really like pushing each other score. For that reason, I'm going to go 3-3, and I think nice. I think both teams will exploit the other's issues and not have enough in their own camp to be able to sort out their own. So I'll go 3-3. As for who's going to score the goals for City, it'll be Foden. Foden's the dangerous one. Yeah. Probably 2 from him and 1 from Haaland.
One thing is for sure, everyone will be watching this one. It's kind of a train wreck. Everyone wants to see which team's going to maybe miss out on the chip.
Yeah.
Because as we talked about before, people really dislike both of our clubs, so they're going to be watching, wondering who's going to be left out, and
who can I hate the most? Yeah.
All of that. All right, well, David, thanks so much for coming on and previewing that. Really appreciate it, and we'll have you on again real soon. Appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks very much.